struggling here. Even though they thought they had a lot of momentum, a lot of impetus on the gun control issue, they've blown all of that by alienating so many Americans. And you wonder, why is it that they're doing that? I mean, right now, there's a rather unpopular Republican president by polling numbers. Trump today was tweeting out that he's doing really well in the Rasmussen poll. You can't cite one poll. You have to cite the poll average. The poll averages tend to be pretty close. And for all those people who said in the last election cycle the polls were wrong, no, certain polls were wrong. The national poll average was exactly correct. It had Hillary Clinton winning by anywhere from 3 to 5 points. She won the national popular vote by about 3 points. Okay, that is not a suggestion she won the election, but it is a suggestion that national polling on average is pretty good. Okay, the national polling average for President Trump is not very good. And yet Democrats are still struggling. Democrats may not win back the House. Okay, every time it seems like the Democrats leap out to a big lead, that lead immediately begins to recede because Democrats are so extreme. So what exactly is driving the extremism of the Democrats? Why can't they just sit there and say, listen, we don't like Trump, you don't like Trump, nobody likes Trump, vote for us? Why isn't that their platform? Why isn't their platform, we just want to be more moderate and provide a check on the president? This is what parties normally say in years when they are not in the White House and it's an off-year election. Why can't they just do that? The answer is because there's a deep-seated instinct on the part of some folks on the left that does not like what America is. Does not like what America is. And not just points out problems with America, but thinks that these problems go straight to the heart of the country and in many cases are unsolvable. So there's a really fascinating piece over at The Atlantic by a guy named William Barber in the Martin Luther King issue. And he talks about the real crisis that is ailing America. And here's what he says. He says, 4 diseases, all connected, now threaten the nation's social and moral health. Racism, poverty, environmental devastation, and the war economy, sanctified by the heresy of Christian nationalism. That's some pretty extreme stuff. That's some pretty extreme stuff that William Barber is putting out there. He says, since the 2016 presidential election, when white rage propelled a candidate endorsed by the Ku Klux Klan into the White House, racism has been more prominent in public life. If you really think that Trump won because he was winking and nodding at the KKK, no. If you recall, I shellacked him on the air when he refused to condemn the KKK. And then, of course, he came out within 24 hours and condemned the KKK, not because of me, but because Trump knew that this was an unwinnable battle and he had said the wrong thing. And so he moved on beyond that. Okay, but the left is really ensconced in this vision of the United States as a deep, dark place. And in a second, I'm going to explain how deep that vision goes and why it bodes ill for their electoral prospects. So here is what this article says. It says, again, 4 diseases all connected threaten the nation's social and moral health. Racism, poverty, environmental devastation, and the war economy. First of all, racism in the United States was at an all-time low before the election of Barack Obama. It was actually declining, and then Barack Obama was elected, and he decided to polarize people for political gain based on race and ethnicity. That was a problem. Poverty in the United States. Okay, if you think that poverty in the United States is the chief problem crippling the United States, you do not have any global perspective. The poorest people in America are rich by global standards. According to Pew Research, 9 out of 10 Americans are rich people by global standards. 9 out of 10. The number of people in the United States living in extreme poverty by global standards is significantly less than 2%. Okay, environmental devastation. Where's this environmental devastation that you're talking about in the United States? The environment has been getting better for decades. I live in Los Angeles. The entire city used to be covered in a thick blanket of smog. The environment has been getting steadily better in the United States for years and years and years. And the war economy, what war economy? What war economy? Where exactly is the mass spending at World War II levels? A war economy, normally you're talking about 40% of GDP being eaten up by the military. Right now, you're talking about 20% of the American budget. Forget the GDP being eaten up by the military. And that's a fairly normal percentage for American history. But here is what William J. Barber contends. He says, all of these are the real sicknesses in America. He says, the question is not whether politicians condemn hate, but whether they promote the policy agenda of white supremacy. Since 2010, we have seen an assault on voting rights in numerous state legislatures, which the Supreme Court exacerbated in 2013 by gutting a crucial provision of the Voting Rights Act. Again, this is incorrect. The crucial provision of the Voting Rights Act had the federal government overseeing states based on maps that were drawn in 1965. And the Supreme Court said those might be obsolete because it's 55 years later, guys. And this is apparently gutting of the Voting Rights Act. The states that attack voting rights by using partisan gerrymandering, discriminatory voter identification requirements, or a rollback of early voting and same-day registration are also home to the lowest wage, the severest poverty, the greatest hostility towards immigrants in the LGBT community, and the deepest cuts in education funding. Politicians who try to suppress voting are using their power to hurt the poor and the working class, white, brown, and black. There is no effort in the United States to suppress the vote. None. In 2008 and 2012, the black percentage of the voting base significantly outperformed the black percentage of the population. The number of people who are black who voted as a percentage was very, very high in 2008 and 2012. They didn't show up for Hillary Clinton in 2016 because Hillary was a garbage candidate that no one wanted to vote for. And this is what the left can't accept. The left can't accept that Trump won. And so that means America is bad. Every time a Republican wins, America is a terrible place. Every time a Democrat wins, America is a wonderful place. America is a place of hope and change. It's amazing. The homeless just disappear from the news. You notice this. Every time there's a Republican who's president, the homeless reappear on the streets. Just like magic. There were no homeless until Trump was president. There was no poverty until Trump was president. No racism until Trump was president. We were living in an Edenic age. And then the original sin. Hillary Clinton lost her bid for presidency of the United States, and that was the end. America was now enmeshed immediately. Like a light switch. Trump takes office in January, and boom, environmental degradation. It's like Logan's Run, right? The entire country is being overrun by vines. We're killing our old. The young are being left out to die in the middle of the wilderness. It's Soylent Green. We're feeding people to other people, but packaging it as potato chips. This is the way that the left actually views the way that the world works. Trump was elected, and they have gone off their rocker. And this is why they're having such trouble gaining credibility with the American people. Because even if people don't like Trump, they can look at Democrats and say, you know, you keep saying things are so crazy and so terrible here, and they're really not so crazy and so terrible. And more importantly, it's not that you're saying the situation in America is bad. You're saying the people of America are bad. Because when you read that again, there's no way to read this without seeing a significant amount of anger at people in red states. Those people in red states are just rubes and morons. Those people in red states are corrupt and evil. Those people in red states are immigrant haters. This is a deep perspective in the Democratic Party. It's what Hillary Clinton has been saying when she goes abroad. America's a sexist, racist place. The intersectional politics being pushed by the left, this stuff is not going to work. Okay, this stuff is not going to attract people in the United States to voting Democrat. It's just not going to happen. And the fact that folks on the left don't understand this is a particularly good reason why they could possibly not do well in the midterm elections when all the indicators would be pushing in their favor. Okay, so I want to read you the worst column on dating I have ever read. I have been giddy over this article for the better part of 24 hours. This is an article that appeared in the Washington Post. Now, the Washington Post has had some real doozies in the last 24 hours. They have a full article right now on the Washington Post on why it is good that Xi Jinping, who is the dictator of China, just declared himself dictator, and it's good, right? That he got rid of term limits, and it's good. The actual title of the piece over at Washington Post is "Why Xi's Lifting of Term Limits is a Good Thing." Okay, I know the Washington Post has released a series of articles of late talking about why communism is wonderful, but it's still a little bit disquieting when they are running full articles about why it is that a Chinese dictator taking full control of his country for the foreseeable future is a great thing. And it's weird that the Washington Post didn't run a similar thing about Vladimir Putin, rigging an election in Russia. Right? So they're very anti-China, and they're very very anti-Russia rather, and very pro-China. So that's kind of weird. But that wasn't the worst editorial at the Washington Post. This one was, okay? It's by a woman named Carrie Purcell. Never heard of this lady. No idea who she is. Don't know her from Bob. I mean, she's a random person, a New York-based journalist who writes about theater, film, TV, and politics, which is to say, she is a bore. Okay, so here is what she actually wrote. This is an amazing piece. It is perfect for Passover. And this is the title. You ready for this? I am tired of being a Jewish man's rebellion. What in the world? What in the world? I mean, can you imagine if somebody wrote a piece for the Washington Post, a white woman wrote a piece for the Washington Post titled, I am tired of being a black man's rebellion, and it was all about how black men were dating white women to sleep with them and then ditch them for black women and it was time to get married. That's what this piece is about. And the reason I'm reading you this piece is not just because you probably shouldn't be publishing full-scale anti-Semitism in the pages of the Washington Post, but also because this piece is a window into the mind of so many young people and how they date. It really is. So we're going to go through it because it's intensely amusing. So here is what Carrie Purcell, this genius, says. At my very first job in New York, a colleague jokingly informed me, you came in a WASP, but you're leaving a Jew. That statement was in reference to the demographics of the office's staff. Almost everyone who worked there was Jewish, and I, a recent college graduate who had spent my adolescence in a largely Christian community in the South, was not. At the time, I had no idea she would end up being so right. Ooh, ominous. This is where you play the organ in the background softly. As a teenager, I attended exactly one bat mitzvah, but moving to New York provided endless opportunities to learn about the Jewish faith. Friends invited me to join their families for Passover Seders and Hanukkah celebrations. However, it was through my various romantic relationships where I learned the most about Judaism, a religious faith and culture I've grown to love and respect, but that has also contributed to 2 of my biggest heartbreaks. Okay, so how did Judaism ruin her life? It's amazing. Okay. Over almost 7 years and 2 serious relationships with Jewish men who at first said religion didn't matter and then backtracked and decided it did, I've optimistically begun interfaith relationships with an open mind twice, only to become the last woman these men dated before settling down with a nice Jewish girl. This is in the pages of the Washington Post. I can now say with certainty, I am tired of being a Jewish man's rebellion. At first glance, I fulfill the stereotypes of a white, Anglo-Saxon Protestant. This woman writes, I'm blonde, often wear pearls, and can mix an excellent and very strong martini. Manners and etiquette are important to me, and when I'm stressed, I often cope by cleaning. I do describe myself as a Christian, but loosely and in the most liberal sense possible, of course, because if you're really a Christian, then presumably you would talk about values while dating somebody rather than, I don't know, living with some guy for 3 years and then realizing that you share no values and then he ditches you and finds someone with whom he shares values. He says, but if I did find myself falling for someone who did not share my spiritual views, I bring up the subject. If it's going to be a problem, I want to know. That's exactly what I did in my previous long-term relationships, both of which were with Jewish men. And both men said it wasn't a problem that I was Christian, as they considered themselves culturally but not spiritually Jewish. At the very least, they were the most lackadaisical Jews I'd ever met. They never fasted on Yom Kippur or observed Jewish holidays on their own. And when they traveled to celebrate holidays with their families, they made it clear it was an obligation rather than a choice. On more than one occasion in conversation, we laughed about the fact that I knew more about the Jewish faith than they did. I knew having an interfaith relationship could be complicated, and if we stayed together, there would be some difficulties, but I thought it could work. Neither of us were looking to convert the other. We respected each other's faith and culture. And as long as we were able to talk about it, I thought we'd be able to work through any issues that came up. And then she cites a bunch of statistics about interfaith marriages. She doesn't cite the statistic about the divorce rate in interfaith marriages, which is significantly higher than the divorce rate in non-interfaith marriages. So this is always the inconvenient part of the interfaith marriage discussion. You know, I feel this way about interpolitical dating. I was asked recently on a college campus whether a conservative could date a leftist. I said, you can date him, don't marry him. And I feel the same way about a leftist. Okay, if you're a leftist and you believe deeply in social justice, you probably don't want to marry the guy who's a deep devotee of Friedrich Hayek. It's just not going to go well. You're not going to want to raise your kids in the same way. You're not going to have the same social values. But again, this is what happens when you have a society that is very much focused on sex and very much focused on the surface of relationships, just having fun and going on dates and reading the New York Times together. But there's no real discussion of the kind of future you want to have together other than you want to have brunch on Sunday mornings and read the New Yorker. Okay, if that's your perception of how a relationship goes, you know nothing about relationships. But we're a society that has largely discarded the deeper meaning of relationships, which is rooted in values and purpose. Okay, life is rooted in values and purpose. You want to live a fulfilled, meaningful life? You must have a telos in the Greek terminology. You must have a purpose. The same thing is true of a relationship. Everything you do that is important in your life should have a purpose. If you feel aimless at your job, you don't like your job, you have to have a purpose. If you feel aimless in your relationship, you're not going to like your relationship. Your relationship must have a higher goal or purpose. You are building something together.